And shalom, everyone, and welcome to another special edition of Crossing Over on Now UC TV. Crossing Over is a biblical journey beyond the chasm toward the path of life. I am your host, Patricia Hall, and joining me tonight is my co-host, Ezpeleta-Lucas, and our special guest, Nitsa Moshe. Hi, ladies. How are you all tonight?
I am so blessed to be back. Sorry I missed last week, guys. Thanks for stepping in. You guys did awesome. Thank you so much.
We are really glad you're back. How are you, Nitsa?
Awesome. Thank you. It was fun. We missed you, but we just missed that part of that legal advice that you had to offer.
Well, I'm excited about our show tonight. We will be continuing our homeschool education series by discussing curriculum considerations. But before we begin our show, we have a few announcements. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you won't miss any shows in the future. If you would like to join our discussion, we would love it if you could, if you're able to, and if you're listening on YouTube, to click the link in the description below, and it will send you to nystv.org. Hit the live stream, and it will bring you to our family chat. Whether you're on YouTube or in our family chat, we're going to do our very best to moderate both chat rooms and collect any questions that you may have regarding our show's topics. And we will have those questions towards the end of the show. We would love it if you would come visit us at nystv.org, where you can join in our family fellowship chat. But you can also find all of the resources, the archived shows. If you would like to support what we're doing here on Now UC TV, there are amazing opportunities for you to do so. We have some amazing Yeshua wear, great t-shirts, coffee mugs, a variety of amazing t-shirts, hoodies, those types of things that would help us support what Now UC TV is doing. Another announcement is some upcoming conference, Take on the World 2018, August 24th through the 26th in Vermilion, Ohio. You can go to takeontheworld2018.com, I believe, and get all the information. They're just, every single day, it seems like there are new announcements about activities that they're having, speakers. There are so many speakers, you would need an entire show just to list all the speakers and activities. So please go to takeontheworld2018.com and find out all the information there. Also, if you have not yet made plans for Sukkot, Now UC TV will be hosting a Sukkot gathering at Lincoln State Park in Indiana. You can go to Sukkot2018.org. There is also a Sukkot 2018 Facebook page. And we would love it if you would please connect with us on our social media platforms. We have Crossing Over Facebook page. There is the Now UC TV or the NYSTV Fellowship Facebook page. So please, we would love it if you would connect with us. You can also email any of us here at Crossing Over at crossingover8@gmail.com. All right, so that concludes our announcements. Last week, we continued our series on home education by examining legal issues related to homeschooling. So if you weren't able to catch that, we covered a lot of information for everyone to do their own due diligence to research. So please go back and watch that show. But this week, we are discussing curriculum, where to start and how to choose. All right, I am going to screen share. So if you will be patient with me for just a moment. It's taking me just a moment. So just a little patience. And I will attempt to screen share. I did it earlier perfectly without any issues whatsoever. And today...
Hey, Patricia, can I make an announcement?
Yes, please do.
For those of you who are not going to be at your Sukkot, we help Manna from Heaven Ministries here in Oregon do a Sukkot. So people from the Northwest and the Southwest come So if anybody's interested in a Sukkot up here near Lebanon, which is about an hour southeast of Salem, Oregon. So.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much.
They
I'm so
can go
glad.
to Manna.events.
Manna.events.
Yeah.
So please, there are lots of opportunities to gather for Sukkot. So if you're over in this region of the country, if you want to come here, over in Oregon, if you're over there, please check that out. And of course, I did it perfectly during the trial run, but I am having difficulties here. Oh, here we go. All right. Just if you could let me know if I am screen sharing the PowerPoint.
Yes, we see it.
Looks good. Looks good.
All right. I am going to go ahead and share or do the slideshow from beginning and see if it can cover the whole screen. All right. Do you see it in the entire screen?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So, like I mentioned, we are going to discuss, here we are. Excellent. We are going to be discussing curriculum, what things to consider when trying to choose a curriculum, where to start, how to choose. And so when talking about curriculum, one of the first things to consider is learning styles. How do we learn? How do your children learn? And so we're just going to be reviewing some basic learning styles. That would be auditory learning, kinesthetic learning, and visual learning. And just a little note about different learning styles is we can have a certain percentage of how we learn. So someone can be a predominant auditory learner, but they may also learn visually and kinesthetically. Someone may be a little mix of all three. Someone may be more visual and auditory, or more kinesthetic and auditory. So there can be one or the other exclusively, but there can also be a blend of learning styles. And so it's really important to be able to identify and know how our students learn. So for the visual learners, let me get my glasses on. So for the visual learners, these are individuals who prefer reading or writing tasks, obviously. They learn through the eye. Visual learners might do very well with books, graphs, posters, maps, anything that they can see, videos, that type of thing. Let me see, I'm trying to look, my little thing is in, the visual spatial learners may have difficulty with written language and prefer videos and charts.
Patty, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but we are still watching, or what we could see is slide 2. Have
Yes.
you tried slide 3? Is that are you on the visual, or you want to remain still on 2?
Oh, I'm on the visual. Are you all not seeing that?
No, we're still on the 3 learning styles.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can. What about now? Is it on the visual now, or just still the 3?
Still on the 3.
Okay, let's do it this way then. How about now?
There you go.
Okay.
Perfect. Yes.
So
all good.
I don't
all
know what
good.
it is about presenting it in full screen where it doesn't change. So anyway, we'll just do it this way. All right. So for visual learners, they prefer reading and writing tasks. Let me see. Yes. Notes, diagrams, pictures. They will generally be unhappy with a presentation where they're unable to take detailed notes. They usually like to take detailed notes. This is why some visual learners will take notes even when they have printed course notes on their desk in front of them. So they tend to be most effective in written communication, symbol manipulation, that type of thing. And visual learners make up around 65% of the population. Visual learners like books, handouts, blackboard writing, and notes. They tend to learn best alone. but not always. And visual learners organize information by categorizing, like mental spreadsheets and things like that. So for an example, if talking about a task, and I had to look this up, the Inuksuk, they are that Inuksuk, those are have you ever seen those? They're formations made out of stones in the shape of people. So using that as an illustration, as an example, someone who's learning about these structures made out of stones in the shape of people, they may visit websites to view them. They may watch a demonstration of building the structure, but they like the visual presentation. Nitsa, do you have any thoughts on the visual learner?
Just that you can be so visual that you're handicapped in other areas.
Absolutely. I may fall under that.
I have to write and learn through writing extensive notes. And the issue with that when you're homeschooling is I expected that from my children. So I had to learn the hard way.
Yes, understood. And in other ways, visual learners, it's not just writing, but video. They may learn well by seeing a visual demonstration.
Yeah, demonstrations are important too. Yeah.
Right. Visual learners tend to pay close attention to body language of others. And so they may pick up on non-verbal cues that other learners may not.
Gotcha.
So visual learners do benefit from illustrations and presentations that use color. Visual learners are attracted to written or spoken language that is rich in imagery. So even though if a spoken language is rich in imagery to where they can get a mental picture, that also helps a visual learner to learn.
Which, an example is like when I'm studying to get ready to teach or something, I want to see the pictograph language because it just, it paints a visual picture. And so when you're doing this, the thing is to find out what each of your children are as we go through this, because like my oldest daughter, I thought she was being disrespectful because she didn't give me eye contact when she was learning, because I learned that she was very auditory. So that's why we're going through this, is so that, you realize, don't expect your children to learn just like you do, which is really hard sometimes, and then learn what it is that they learn and how they learn. So, yeah.
Exactly. And that's the whole point of us bringing up these learning styles, is so that we can not only be aware of our own learning style, because I was well into adulthood and actually in my master's program learning about learning styles when I identified my own learning style. So it is important to know how we learn and how our students learn, and that everybody can learn differently, and it's all okay. We can benefit from the differences, from the diversity of learning styles.
One of the things I think when we watch the, one room schoolhouse and traditional teaching, a lot of that is totally, I would say most of education is revolved around this. And that's why people who are very kinesthetic or audio have a hard time. Just an example is, I was a straight A student until they put me in higher math and they put me in a cubicle with just audio. And then it was downhill. So this is why it's difficult for a lot of people to function, and children to function in school, is because this is pretty much the way it is out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's so important to know the learning style. Something else interesting about visual learners is they find a passive surrounding ideal. So if you have a visual learner and your environment is very busy, is visually busy, it can be overstimulating.
Yes.
So that's very important to learn. It may be too visually chaotic for them to focus on the material that they need to learn. So,
and they might not want to hear noise or music while they're learning.
Right. Exactly.
The opposite. Yeah.
Right. So it's just important to understand this. Also, just one more point about visual learners is they have a keen awareness of aesthetics. of beauty of the physical environment and of the arts. So you can plan your field trips and extracurricular, or not extracurricular, but your different learning activities specifically around your child's learning style. So do y'all have any other input on visual learners before we move on?
I'm good.
All right. Vicki, do you have anything?
No, actually, I'm waiting to, we do have a question, but we're going to leave the questions, guys. I just want to let you guys know till basically the end, the last 15 minutes, if we could. And also, as a homeschool mom, a new homeschool mom, my question would be, which I think we could leave till the end, a little bit in the end after our last slide on the learning styles, is when you have three kids and each of them have a different learning style, how do we incorporate that into when you have close ages? I've actually had to, I have one child that likes to, as she does her schoolwork, listen to music. Personally, that drives me crazy. I have to have silence. And so it has been kind of difficult in accommodating each child when you have the setting of trying to do them all three together. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does to me. In fact, I had that same experience where my daughter likes to have her earbuds in and listens to instrumental music while she's doing her work. And I used to get on her because I'm like, what are you listening to? What, and she would unplug it and I would hear it, and it is instrumental music, but she needed that to help her focus. And so once I finally got on the board, like, oh, okay, because I would make her stop and she would have difficulty staying on task unless she had that feedback. So I had to learn that. And so definitely, I totally understand that. And so we'll incorporate a little bit of that as we have the discussion through the examples. So like for the example of the visual learner, like I mentioned, if we're talking about the activity of building, learning about a specific art form, like this Inuksux, which is a formation of in the form of a human body made out of stones. A visual learner likes to visit websites, likes to view them, likes to watch a demonstration of the building, whereas an auditory learner they really thrive on description. So with an auditory learner, they most effectively relate to the spoken word. They tend to listen to a lecture and then take notes afterwards, or they rely on printed notes to read aloud later afterwards, or they may record the lecture so that they can have the lecture repeated. Often information written down will have little meaning until it's been heard. And so they may listen to the lecture later again while reading the notes, but just reading the notes alone, it's incohesive for an auditory learner. It may help auditory learners to read written information out loud. Auditory learners may be sophisticated speakers and may specialize effectively in subjects like law or politics. Auditory learners make up 30% of the population. They like lecture classes. They like discussions with others. They like reciting to themselves. They learn best within a group, which is different from the visual learner. The auditory learner organizes information by relationships between facts. They sit where they can hear, but they don't necessarily need to pay attention to what's happening in front because they're listening. They may not coordinate colors or clothes, but they can explain why they are wearing what they are wearing. So if that makes sense. So they may not coordinate their clothes with colors visually, but they can explain there's a reason why they're wearing what they're wearing. It may be due to, it's comfortable or whatnot. Auditory learners may talk or hum to themselves or others when they're bored. So that if your child's an auditory learner and they're talking or humming a lot, it may be an indication that they're bored. They acquire knowledge by reading aloud. Auditory learners remember by verbalizing lessons to themselves. They may have difficulty reading a map or a diagram, but if they verbalize or describe what they're seeing, it may make more sense to them. Auditory learners can remember quite accurately details of information that they hear. They have a great auditory recall. Auditory learners have strong language skills, which include a well-developed vocabulary and appreciation for words. And just being a speech pathologist, the reason that is because the auditory center is in the temporal lobe, and so it's right beside the language center. Of the Broca's area in the brain is the language center, and the auditory learners, when they're dominant in that center of the brain, it's like the neighbor to the language center of the brain. So, for example, with our example of the stone model in the form of a person, the visual learner does well through demonstration. The auditory learner does well with a description. So if they can describe to a classmate or to the instructor how to build, or if someone describes the instructions to them, they can prepare a presentation and present it to the class on how to build this model. So what are your thoughts on auditory learners, Nitsa?
Well, this is a good opportunity for your children to do a narration back to you once they've learned something, or you've read a story, and or go off and come back with a little play. And that question regarding, like when you have multiple children at multiple ages and they have different skills, you can cover something, especially when you learn together as a family a certain subject, and especially like in unit studies. Like I always put my kids maybe separate for English and math, depending on the differences between them, but all the other subjects we pretty much learn together. So appropriate to the age and appropriate to the learning style, one might go off and build something related to what we're studying, and another might write a story, and another one might come back and put on a little play or narrate it back. So, and the other children sometimes will do that with them. And then that way the other children are learning the other modalities, but one child gets to kind of shine in that department. So, yeah.
I like that. Just using where they're at and
Right.
using the different modalities to help them learn. So excellent.
I love that. I just need to chime in because that would really help with for instance, my 6-year-old. He really is not into the whole coloring thing, and he wants to build.
Right.
And sometimes it's just difficult to kind of get them together to and it would be, so I guess it's a good thing, not necessarily to force them, but really to help them learn in all different aspects. Cause I guess it's a type of refining them, correct? Is that what you're saying,
Right.
Lisa?
And like, especially like during Bible time or whenever you're reading a story, we used to give our children, especially the ones that wanted to, paper and pen. And, have them ask them, please draw or doodle or whatever what you're hearing. And some you can tell, the more auditory ones, they will, they'll start drawing, or because then they get to move, especially if they're kinesthetic and or auditory, they'll be moving at the same time, and that gives them an option to that. One thing that I think, if I can interject, and if you'll go back to slide 2, I just realized this. I didn't get to study that really good, but if you get a chance, look up Dr. Caroline Leaf, Leaf. She's a Christian neuroscientist, and I wish I had learned this years ago because I come from the old school and I made my oldest children miserable. Okay, but I learned, for instance, she used to have this book called, if you can find it, and the DVD or the book, she used to have a book called The Gift in You. I think she's repackaged it and it's coming out new, and I think the new version of it is called The Perfect You. And she teaches as a neuroscientist that we're not left brain or right brain. She says the opposite. She says we're actually like 7 layers, like God's rainbow, in 7 ways, and that we learn like in a certain order of these different cognitive rainbows, if you can kind of, like one's really verbal, one's, very logical or mathematical, etc. And she says that what you do after you take this assessment test, now it fit everyone in our family to the T, was it was based in a certain order. So you had 3 primaries. And so what I found interesting was when you had the Venn diagram here, for those who don't know what a Venn is, you see these 3 main circles, right, on the PowerPoint. But how many total are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I thought that was very amazing. Where they're congruent. So the Venn diagram shows what is common or can lap over in these areas. So I really encourage you. She also has a 21-day detox. She talks about how we physically change, biologically change, chemistry change in our bodies by the way we think. And I think if the lady is listening, she put a thing on the Facebook. I think her name was Laura Hickman, about depression. I encourage you, go get Dr. Leaf's work and her books or audios or DVDs, because she has amazing stuff and she comes from a Christian biblical point of view and she's amazing. So I just wanted to say that. And for one thing was, like, I would discipline my children if they were moving while I was teaching, right, back in the old days. And I have a son who he can't do anything without bouncing or moving somewhere, okay? And if a child couldn't perform in a certain thing, my way I was brought up and the way I would have taught back then was, I'm going to take this away from you until you learn to do this correctly. And she explained, as a neuroscientist, no. And she had this example of this young man who, he just really couldn't really do, I think it was his English or some other things, but he loved music. And she said no, because Yahweh, of course she uses the word God, uniquely created him this way. And if you take away the very thing that gives him life and the way he learns, then he's just, basically going to wilt like a flower. So she did the exact opposite of what I would have done and the way I was raised and schooled. She said, give him all the time he needs to play and do what he needs to do. And then they showed how within time, because he came to life doing those things, he began to apply and learn to do the subjects that he didn't really like or want to do, versus making him suffer until he performs. So there's just different ways. And she has also those big balls, those bouncy balls, which are great for birthing, by the way. If you have a kinesthetic child, they actually have children and people who learn by moving. So if your child can sit on the ball and they're just moving, they're just moving. That's just what they have to do. But they actually process and learn that way. So I just wanted to bring her work out and, check that out, because I think it's evident and shows up on this Venn diagram.
Oh, Nitsa, see, that's why I love so much having you on here. You are such an amazing resource. Dr. Caroline.
I've seen a lot.
Dr. Caroline Leaf. She is a cognitive neuroscientist. I was just Googling her. So
and I think it's me too. And I'll post it on, I'm so sorry. I was just saying I was going to post it on the chat. Yeah. I'll post it on the chat.
Good. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Nitsa. Was there something else you wanted to say?
No, well, I just wanted to give that example. Yeah. And just really research it, especially also if you're dealing with depression and different things. And, you have children who have questions, because the children, when they see this and they go through that gift and how they're thinking, because, it's really, we learn things even at home, and then it sticks in our mind and it hinders us. My oldest son, he struggled to learn to read at 13 and 14. He was still struggling. And it bothered him because his little brother at 6 and 7 was reading the encyclopedia on his own. Okay. And he just got in his mind that he couldn't do things. And my youngest son's the same way. He's extremely intelligent in math and logic, but he can't always relate. He shorts out. And it's just teaching them, you don't need to put yourself in a box and feel bad because you don't perform or act or learn like somebody else. You really do need to learn that you're special and you're unique. And when we homeschool, we have the opportunity to embrace this and give this to our children instead of making them conform like the school system would.
Absolutely. I think that right there is the most important aspect of home education, is that we have the opportunity to allow our children the freedom to be who Yahweh made them to be.
Yes.
And so learning, how we learn, how they learn, and not putting them in this classroom box, and getting out of that mindset, which was a process for me. So absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. And I'll definitely be looking into Dr. Caroline Leaf myself. That sounds amazing. So we went over the visual learners. We talked about the auditory learners. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the kinesthetic learner. Pardon me. A kinesthetic or tactile touch learner, they learn effectively, obviously, through touch, movement, and space. They learn skills by an imitation and practice. They predominantly are kinesthetic tactile learners, can appear slow, when in fact information is normally not presented in a style that suits their learning methods. Right. So they're not slow, they're just not presented with the style in which they learn, because generally most things are predominantly visual and or auditory. Kinesthetic learners make up 5% of the population. They do not like taking notes, recopying notes, or outlining the book. They don't care for that. They learn best with one other person. So it's kind of like a one-on-one. They organize information with the big picture or the overall plan. They like to see the big picture. Kinesthetic learners need to be active and take frequent breaks. They speak with their hands and with gestures or their whole body. They may appear like ADD at times when it's not. They're just they're demonstrative. They use a lot of gestures. They remember what was done, but they have difficulty recalling what was said or seen. So when they study, it has to look very differently because they recall or remember what was done, the action. They find reasons to tinker or to move when bored. Kinesthetic learners rely on what they can directly experience or perform. Activities such as cooking, construction, engineering, and art help them to perceive and learn. They enjoy field trips and tasks that involve manipulating materials. They sit near the door or someplace where they can easily get up and move around. They need to have space where they can move. They're uncomfortable in classrooms where they lack opportunity for hands-on experience. They communicate by touching and appreciate physically expressed encouragement, such as a pat on the back or visually thumbs, where they can feel or react, claps, that kind of thing. They often do well with athletics, acting, dancing, or working with tools. They are well coordinated with a strong sense of timing and body movements. They may do really well with like a game like hacky sack, which I absolutely cannot perform at all. Kinesthetic learners tend to pace when learning something difficult, so they may have to get up and move in order to learn something that may be difficult to process. They often wiggle, tap their feet, move their legs when they sit. And so if you or your child is a tactile learner or a kinesthetic learner, trace your words as you're saying them. Facts that must be learned should be written several times. Keep a supply of scratch paper for this purpose. So they may have to, you trace your words or have them trace their words either in the air or on a piece of paper. Use manipulatives, models, Play-Doh, hands-on materials whenever possible. Provide hands-on activities to reinforce visual and auditory information. So with our example of the structure, learning about the form model of a person that's built with stones. They need to actually build one. They need to have the rocks and fill them and put them into place. What are your thoughts? Do you all have any kinesthetic learners, Nitsa, Vicki?
Go ahead, Vicki.
I certainly do. And it's funny because I was, as you were going and talking through all these different styles, I realized that I think everybody has a little bit of all of it, right? Of, like you were saying, Nita, like the whole rainbow, the 7 aspects of learning. And, you know, it's just really figuring out what works for your child. And, you know, and I just want to say, thank you for everything that you impart, Nita, because as a first year homeschool mom, it's just so, like, exactly how you were saying. We were taught in school, and so many times you just want to put your children in a box, and definitely, like, what do you mean you want to listen to music, classical music? Like, don't you have to concentrate? And so all of these things are just really helping us to understand what is best for our kids. And really it just drives into my mind and my heart how we're doing the right thing by homeschooling, because, you know, the public school system just wants to put all kids into a box. And so I'm just loving it, guys. And so is everybody in the chat. So good job.
Well, see, and that's part of the problem, because, you know, they bring the kids in and they mark them and then they drug them, because if they don't fit in these. I mean, I have a son who has always had a problem with touch and feel. If you like touch a fork when you're eating, he falls apart, you know. And I mean, he would have been labeled probably Asperger or something. And but he loves classical music and Celtic music. And when he went through an extreme situation with his teeth, they played that music. He asked him to, and he just, like, he was on drugs. The drugs wasn't helping, you know. I have another one who they would have immediately marked him as ADHD, and you know, he runs and moves and he's totally kinesthetic. I have another one who, yeah, he could build anything. And I think, you know, a lot of times our inventors are, you know, people who can really design or do things in their minds are kinesthetic learners, and we're trying to put them in boxes. You know, some things to suggest to do is, you know, you can take a pan, like a baking pan, and put cornmeal on it, or you can go out to the sandbox, but it's a little messier, and let them write their letters in there, especially if they're tactile or kinesthetic, because sometimes approaching it in a different way will help them. So, you know, they can write in their fingers and feel with cornmeal or something like that. Cooking, you know, I had a daughter who, you know, math on paper was like death. But, you know, you put her in the kitchen and she actually can measure and use, they can think and see and understand that. So sometimes if you don't think they're getting it, then it's because it's the way it's presented. And, you know, I was like that. When I went to school, we didn't have kindergarten when I went to school, but when I went to school, you had to tie your shoe before you could go to first grade. Okay. And it was like the hardest thing I ever learned in my life. And I'm pretty smart, you know, but it was because I could not see when people were tying their shoes. So I had to sit and watch over and over at a view that it wasn't just real fast and, you know, it was visible. So you just have to figure out and look for those opportunities of that. And you know, different curriculums will focus sometimes on just one major kind of learner, and some will be more open. So those are things that you know, you want to do, because what will happen again is they will be marked and labeled, and they don't get to figure out until you bring them home and homeschool them. And if they've been in public school for a while or whatever, they have all this stigma on them, and they don't get to learn to think outside the box and think, oh, we're all unique. We all get to learn a special way. We all get to do a special thing. And it encourages them to be, you know, the entrepreneurs or the things that they're called for. You know, a lot of us are called to go and read and learn with a book. but not, I would say a majority of them aren't. I mean, for instance, why would we want, in my opinion, most children to go learn algebra to the guys who can go on and build an engine from scratch or build a building? I mean, yes, some of them need that if they're going to go to engineering school, but other children, that is just, it's a waste of their time, honestly. And, beat me up for that. But the reality is there's lots of people and children who grow up who were given that opportunity. I bet you the Wright brothers were not, straight visual learners, they were kinesthetic. So anyway.
Oh, I guarantee that's such a great point. I bet they were absolutely kinesthetic learners, and to the point where they had to feel themselves in literal space. So
yeah, now I feel sorry for the moms of those kind of children sometimes.
Exactly. And also we did shaving cream. Like I would do my cookie sheet, my baking pan, and shaving cream.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And that was just so amazing, to do their letters and their shapes. We did a lot of Play-Doh and homemade Play-Doh, and I would have them make letters or make shapes or make whatever. And so, and even when just this past school year, my kids are older and we had psychology and we were learning about the brain and the neuroanatomy. And, we brought in Play-Doh and had them, one of their activities. And here we see all these juniors and seniors in high school, and they were having a blast with Play-Doh, making the different structures of the brain out of Play-Doh. So,
yeah. There's a comment in the chat. I'm not sure if I'm seeing them all, but this is a good point to bring out as we're talking about modalities is, some children's, their diet needs to change because some kids aren't going to be as hyperactive or kinetic if they don't, if they're not on sugar and red dye and green dye and blue dye. So that's something to consider also. It might not just be their learning style. It might be they're having something that's causing a lot of brain activity or brain shutdown for that matter.
Oh, I'm so glad that you brought that point up because everything, Yahweh made us interconnected. As our own bodies, everything's connected, but also the corporate body, we're all connected, and one thing affects everything else. So one action, something that is consumed, whether it's physical nutrition or whether it's a doctrine in a person or in the body, if it doesn't give life, what does it give? It gives death and destruction. And so I'm so glad that somebody brought that up. That is absolutely correct. So if we're ready to move on, we'll go ahead and talk about research and picking a curriculum. So, of course, we've been talking about that issues vary from child to child, subject to subject, the parent's ability. So as you're researching to pick a curriculum, variables vary from child to child, from subject to subject, from the parent's ability. Like something may sound perfect, but if you are not able to perform it, then it's not an option. And the next point is let the Bible define your subjects. Use the Bible to be spirit-led. And so using the Bible as primary textbook, there's so many different subjects that can be derived from the truth of Scripture. So, there's history, there's literature, there's drama, there's science, there's math. So there's so much that can be derived. There's, calculation of the calendar, there's seasons, there's so much that can be derived from the Bible, from that textbook. And it is important to remember that we must have a kingdom mindset because we are raising a remnant as we come out of Egypt. And we could be raising the remnant that is a part of the greater Exodus. And even if they're not, then it's their responsibility to continue to raise the remnant and pass it on until Yeshua comes back. So we have to keep the main thing the main thing. and that is the kingdom mindset. What are your all's thoughts on gaining this perspective right here before we move on?
Go ahead, Victoria.
Well, and I'm so grateful that Nita's on this journey with us, because I'm going to tell you, she is such an amazing asset, guys. She provided the majority of the outline that we're using for these shows, and it time and time again blows my mind of, again, the understanding of what it means to be raising a remnant, and again, thinking kingdom mindset. It really is challenging me, because I'm going to tell you, our first year, and I'm so glad we're talking about this, our first year of homeschool, we spent like $1,200 on different curriculums trying to figure this out. And Ryan, my husband, he was like, "No, we're buying more," and it's me really just trying to figure out what will work.
Trying to find
but through this
one.
yes, but through this show, for me, it's crazy. For me, guys, it has helped me understand that we have the Bible. We want to see everybody, a lot of people think, well, it's so expensive. Yes, I made it expensive, guys, honestly. But if we just use the Bible, if we use the Bible for our road map for our children there, and think outside the box, that's all we need, Nita. So I just needed to chime in. Go ahead.
Well, I guess here's the thing. When you go to pick your curriculum, you got to remember this now. But I know we've all been trained for 13, 14 years. I mean, where we came out of, and it's just like going from Christianity to observing the Torah and all of the scriptures, is that we can only replace or change what we're comfortable or we know to step into, And so, when I came home, I'm the textbook queen. I'm visual, get the rulers on the hands. That's the way it was when I went to school, and I expected the same. But as I was homeschooling my children with the Ruach, with the Holy Spirit, it was like, first of all, sometimes the curriculum was wrong. Sometimes I needed to tweak it as to fine tune what I believed or didn't believe that Father was showing me. And I think one of the things that, so I think most women, I could be wrong, but I think most parents feel inadequate and unsure, and they're scared they're going to do something wrong. Now, I happen to be one of those few people that I'm the opposite. I'm a little too cocky. I think I can just do it. But actually, the hardest thing to me was, how do I break it down easy to teach them to read? That was my biggest problem. But I learned that the curriculum is just a tool, number one, if you buy one. You can always learn to create your own, but most of us won't do that because we're scared. We only get Christian curriculum or whatever until we learn enough of the Word of God and His principles. And then we can look at secular things and see right through it and split it and teach that to our children with critical thinking. But you've got to remember, do not let the curriculum drive you, on how many weeks and how much you have to get done and all the volume of what you have to get done, because it will burn you out. And I can tell you, having taught junior high to high school in a Christian school, what counts as school can include a party and a field trip. And the one thing one of my classes did, I taught geography in one of my some junior high classes. We had the room decorated, each homeroom decorated to a country. I mean, we brought in hay, and I think we did Australia, and we had fake kangaroos. And I mean, that is all learning. And so you'll have to be stretched. I don't know if it's still out there, but there was a curriculum called KONOS, K-O-N-O-S, and it had so many wonderful hands-on artsy craftsy stuff, and that just totally overwhelmed me. I couldn't even identify and never thought I was creative. But I learned little bits and pieces of it. That's another thing. Get with other people to co-op. or just one friend, just two friends, and say, hey, would you show my friends, you're really good at experiments. We had a lady, Barbara Smith, she was so good at prison experiments. We had another lady who, could really do artsy, craftsy, wonderful stuff, Diana. And so use the curriculum, and this is going to tie back to part 1. Remember, make your mandate, understand your mandate to teach your children. It's about raising godly children. It's not about making sure they can follow the core curriculum and the New World Order curriculum to become a New World Order citizen. That is not what this is about. So you've got to learn to walk out on faith. I encourage you to get the book. I think it's still out there. I think Heart of Wisdom is now the website. I used to know her as Robin Scarlatta 30 years ago, but I think it's Robin Sampson now. She has a book out there. It's basically called What You Need to Know According to the Bible and According to the State. And you can actually use that to facilitate how you pick your curriculum and or to write your own. But remember, you're in charge, and Father gave you the heart and the spirit to educate your children, whether you do it directly or delegate some of it out or find the right curriculum or videos or whatever. Your overall, he can help you and walk you through it. And on one hand, you can't do anything because he has to do it and you have to rely on him. On the other hand, he can empower you to do it. So I'm just saying, don't let the curriculum drive you. Don't be bound in your mind, your heart, and your soul to Pharaoh's system, because that's really what we're dealing with. But learn to find that middle ground and dip your toe into the new world of wonder and expansion that you can do with your children and your family, and until you unlearn those other things. And so I think that's just, the big one. You have a unique family, you have unique children, and you need to take into consideration their modalities of learning, your modalities and your abilities, and work together as a family. And it's okay not to look like what we've been taught through the system all these years. And it's going to take time, and be easy on yourself, or you will burn out and you will lose your vision, and you won't have peace, and your children won't have peace. And, you just don't want to go there. So that's all I got to say right now.
Oh, thank you so much, Nitsa, for that encouragement and that wisdom that we don't need a teaching certificate from the system to say, okay, now I can teach. You know what I mean? That the Father, we have all that we need from the Father, and that he will lead and guide us, and that he gave us a mandate. And that I like what you said about we can't change or move until we know what to step into. And so I like that we have to unlearn where we came from in order to be able to receive what's coming and what the Father has for us. So, and
we have proof and statistics throughout at least the 70s, 80s to now, that overall homeschool children's, I want to say it's 70 to 90% higher than most of their public school peers in testing on overall and success. So it's not like things, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and he'll add all these things to you. And it doesn't have to be perfect and like the system, because obviously the system has failed.
Exactly.
It used to take 3 or 4 years to learn, now takes 13 to 15, and they still don't have it. They still can't make change when you get to the store. Just saying.
Exactly. Yes, the system is not perfect. Why do we want to imitate it? Yeah. So absolutely. Another thing about research and picking a curriculum, it is more important than what you teach their children is teaching them how to learn, how to reason, how to problem solve, how to think critically. So the more than filling them full of knowledge and information is how to learn. How do we learn things? So we have to know how they learn in order to teach them how to learn, if that makes sense. Right. The Christian Torah mindset versus the secular worldly. So it is critical that we teach our children how to look at information and think critically, because we have the same evidence, the same things to look at that the world does. It is the worldview that we come from. I don't want my kids to just recite what we believe or what we have learned, or just simply to recite scripture. I want scripture inside of them to change them and move them, to cause them to walk in the Father's ways, not simply to do it because that's what we said. I want them to know why. Why are we doing what we're doing? And why is the world different? And what is that difference? How can we, as Yahweh says in Isaiah chapter 1, come, let us reason together. The Father wants us to be able to reason. So we should want our children to be able to reason. Come, let us reason together. Let's think this through. Let's look at behaviors and their outcomes. So, the world says, with regards to premarital sex, oh, you need to try it before you buy it. But the Bible says something differently. And now let's look at the two outcomes. You know what I mean? Like there's data there that supports that Yahweh's ways are good and bring life, and the world's ways bring destruction and death. And so teaching our children how to learn, how to reason, how to think critically, giving our kids a biblical mindset, and not allowing the world, if we're not actively creating a Yahweh-focused mindset in our children, the world will give them their mindset. So we have to be active. We cannot be passive. What are your thoughts, Nitsa?
Well, one thing that just comes to mind, and I think hopefully we'll get time to get into this, but that's the problem with a lot of not secular, Christian, especially the textbooks for homeschooling, is a lot of them just have scripture tacked onto them. But the mindset, the principle, the thinking, it's still conforming to the system and Pharaoh. And so, yeah, it's really getting to know the word and the principles behind things. That's important to understand. Just like what you had brought up about, trying on the shoes, or before you get married and trying someone out, that really teaches is that it's not of extreme value. Because if you have an extreme piece of china, which nobody appreciates anymore, real china, is that once it's broken, and you can glue it back together. And I'm not saying that Yahweh can't renew and make you whole again, but it's much better if that piece of china is never, ever broken. Because once that soul and that heart is broken, so, just teaching those kinds of values. And we live in a consumable, even most of your curriculum is consumable, right?
Exactly.
Back in the old days, they had a little chalkboard and they had a set of books, raise arithmetic. If you could teach your children raise arithmetic by one set of math books, is good for all grades, takes them all the way through in the McGuffey readers. Hey, you don't have to buy any more curriculum. And most textbook is a repeat every year of 30 to 70%, and they keep changing them. So you have to buy new curriculum every year. So anyway, we'll get
exactly.
into it later.
I know with one of the curriculum that we went with, their Bible class was they had to memorize so many scripture. And don't mishear me, it is important to hide the Father's word in our hearts. But memorization for memorization's sake does not teach context. And so I tweaked that curriculum. And what we did was we learned, okay, this is your scripture from the book of Romans. Okay, who wrote Romans? Why was it written? Who was it written to? What was it written about? Getting the context. Okay, now tell me these scriptures. You know what I mean? So definitely tweaking that. Again, memorization is important, but not for memorization's sake, for context, for hiding it in our hearts. So
right. So that we might not sin against God. We got to get the principles behind it.
Exactly. Why was it written? The 5 W's, who, what, where, when, and why. Exactly. All right, Vicki, do you have any thoughts on that before we move on?
I am good. I'm just gleaning off what you guys are, and I know that we have a lot to cover, so I am good. Good.
All right. So just some notes about traditional textbook workbook. So this type of education would be good, like we mentioned, for visual learners. There are often workbooks for each subject with analysis questions, some hands-on activities. You'll have certain areas like science with quizzes and tests. There's a structured scope and sequence with traditional textbooks and workbooks. The curriculum that use this style would be like Rod and Staff, Abeka, Alpha Omega, Life Packs, Apologia. Those are curriculums that use this traditional textbook workbook method. The advantages are the curriculum that uses this format, they usually have good scope and sequence. They're very structured. They provide foundational knowledge on all topics and then build on that through the high school years. The disadvantage is that this type is not usually as flexible. I mean, you can take it and make it flexible to a point, but the course is built around a textbook and the workbooks and often cannot be easily adjusted to include more in-depth studies in a specific area that your kids are interested in. So what are your thoughts? Any thoughts on the traditional textbook workbook curriculum?
I have several.
Yes, I do too. And you know what? They were great for me, and they're great for certain subjects, and they're great to a certain point.
Well, and they're great for first starting out. However,
Yes.
if you do that for all subjects across the board, I think you're going to burn out big time.
Yes,
Can you
I
go
can
back
attest to that.
Can you
What's
go
that?
back to Can you go back to that screen?
Oh, to textbooks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So okay, I got several things to say. One is, let's just pick science, for example. And because I have been around so long, I can tell you something. If you don't vaccinate, which we won't go into why I don't think it's biblical, etc., but if you don't vaccinate, that's something you need to be careful about your science books and your textbooks. That's one of those examples of how, yeah, we've slapped some scripture on there, but we haven't really addressed things, okay? I can tell you that at least 18 years ago, Apologia, when it was first coming out, was kind of a real beginning to be a popular science curriculum. I made a vow that I would never use that curriculum. And the reason is they had published an article about how stupid and uneducated and how rebellious we were who did not vaccinate. Now, he must have got flack because they removed it. So I don't know if it's in the material, but you will find this in many even Christian curriculums. So it's something that you might want to filter out if you decide to get something when this comes up. Okay, so that's one thing I would say. I believe the Alpha Omega Life Packs, they're what we don't call those textbooks, unless things have changed. We call that self-paced. And my point here is to say that textbooks, I think long-term, especially if you have multiple children, is not usually the way to go. But it's probably those who want to copy the system and send their kids to college with degrees, etc. It might be, but overall, the life packs or self-pay, there was PACEs and Alpha Omega life packs. They were considered kind of the dumbed down thing, and a lot of schools used them because it was very easy to go through. But here's my point about that. For me, for a visual learner, for me, that would have been death, is to give me a life pack, okay? But as a mom, and we have lots of moms with multiple children who and/or are working, you don't have to pick the same type of curriculum for every subject for every child. So one child might be trying to accomplish, government and a life pack because mom's working part-time or full-time, or you have a family business, might be the best thing to do for that subject or science or something like that. So you really have to look at not just textbook versus self-paced versus unit study. You have to look at the subject, you have to look at the child, and you have to look at what can mom manage without burnout and without the child burning out. So And then again, remember that the textbook approach also is a lot of repetitiveness. Like the first 30 to 70% of what you're going to learn the next year, you already learned in the previous year. And I can't remember the type of curriculum they call that. There's a word for it, but let me give you an example here. You could buy a spelling book. Here's a book. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this book. It's called Spelling Power. I don't even know if it's in print. But here was my choice. I could either buy a separate spelling book for every child, for every grade, or I could buy this one book. Okay, that's what we called it. We called it Mastery. Okay, so this book, and there's a math book curriculum too. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it was good for grades 1 through 6. Same thing. And you basically, so what you did is you progressed as you mastered each concept. You didn't have to do a lot of busy work every year. If you finish this book with your children, they would know more words than most college graduates. And so, but it was built on mastery. So you learn and then you go on. And there's grammar books like that. The basic things in grammar you can learn like that, the basic rules. So there's different ways and concepts to look at that. And anyway, so I guess that's all I have to say right now.
Excellent. Thank you for that information. So that's textbooks and workbooks. A different type of curriculum or a different structure, I guess, would be unit studies. And these are flexible studies of particular topics that have been designed or adapted by the teacher to meet the particular needs and interest of their children. So unit studies usually integrate one area of study, say like the Renaissance, with subjects such as literature, history, vocabulary. So you use the area of study, the Renaissance, to then learn about and build upon the skills of literature, history, vocabulary. So this approach requires more preparation and planning, but it's highly flexible. And usually unit studies work best in the elementary grades. Curriculums that use this style include Charlotte Mason, Matthew C., Fun Schooling. The advantages to unit studies are that it allows you to focus on specific topics that interest you and your children without being limited to textbooks. It also works well for teaching multiple ages. The disadvantages are that they require more teacher preparation time. Care must be taken to adequately cover all relevant topics over the years, and you'll need to plan a scope and sequence so that all necessary topics are covered and are done at the appropriate level. Do you have much experience with unit studies, Nitsa?
Well, yeah, actually what we used to do is, this is a great thing for multiple children, as I ran a children's home with multiple ages and children. And what we did, this was an excellent thing to maybe get with another family or two. And I think we had 5 families. So what we did is we picked medieval times. Now you could do this individually, but of course, if you can share this with another family, it would be awesome. So what we did is we sat down and we said, okay, we want to cover, this, this, and this. So we did a certain period of time. And I was interested in the plague. And I used the scriptures to teach. So I would teach, what does the word of God say about breathing? And then I would talk about the blood system, and we would talk about the scripture and that. And then we would pull out the worksheet on the respiratory system, the science, and the blood circulatory system, because there was the plague, which was passed by the pathogen through the rat. And so we did an all scope thing on that. And then another mom would come along and she would do the art or the music of that time period. And another mom would do the experiments. Now, one mom can do all of that. Or if you have older children, you can actually get your older children to be their assignments to teach the younger children and to share. So it really depends on the ages and the ranges of your children. So yeah, we used, I think unit studies are great. What I mostly did was I'd make sure my math and my English was taught at appropriate one-on-one level with my children until they could go off on their own. But everything else was the unit study in our household. So we did Bible together, we did everything together. And then if I, whatever the science was, whatever the history was, depending on their age and their ability and level, well, one might have to write a paper and research, or they would be interested in the art of it, or the music of it, or whatever it was, and maybe read more literature. So that's what ended up working best for me, was focusing on the math and the English, because to me, all subjects based around those. So I focused on those one-on-one because that took most of my time and energy. And then we worked together as a family to create the rest of that and whatever it was. And we usually had a plan for every year that we felt, was something of interest or a time period. And of course, we always looked for opportunities, because sometimes something might come up that, one time the replicas of the ships that the pilgrims were, came over on. So we went and did that. But I think I personally don't worry about the gaps that are missing because I think overall the children actually pick up on a lot. And let me just share something really quick with you. Because sometimes you think you're covering all the gaps and they don't get it. Before 9/11, we lived in Florida at the time, and we took a trip from Florida, and we went up most of the 13 original colonies, including New York, downtown Battery Park, Vermont, New Hampshire, all of that. And what I did, and this is something not to forget or to incorporate, travel is amazing. It is an amazing learning opportunity. You'd be amazed at what your children will learn if you prepare nothing. But every time you get in that car and you travel, they're learning. And of course, I did the teacher thing, and I put a little notebook together, and I had a page for every state of the original 13 colonies. And so they learned the flag, the bird, the state, whatever and we went through almost every single one of them. We went to downtown Battery Park. We went to Washington, D.C., okay? So a couple of years later, my second daughter was 7 at the time. A couple of years later, 9/11 happens, right? And we're sitting there one day, and my daughter, who was about 12 or 13 then, she brought up the fact that Washington, D.C. was in New York. Okay. And I was just flabbergasted. Like, how could you not know that? You went there. You went to New York. You went to Washington, D.C. You colored the pages. We went into detail about everything. But here's what happened. And this is a warning to you of how powerful this is. What mattered in her mind was when she was watching what happened at the towers, on the television, here would flash up the towers, and then they would flash up the Pentagon problem, the accident that happened in the plane in there. And that's how she placed those two together, even though she had been there and studied them. Anyway, so.
Yeah, well, that visual is so powerful.
Yes.
And, at the age and that's something else to remember, is realizing where our children are in their stages and those formative developmental. So that concrete stage versus that formal concrete stage, and just starting to learn when they start to learn a little bit abstractly. So getting real familiar with, I think it's Jean Piaget, his developmental stages. So,
and I think everyone should at least read Charlotte Mason's, some of her approaches. I think those are wonderful to do with some children.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Another thing to consider with curriculum, or another structure, is the classical education.
Mm-hmm.
They have around here called classical conversations. It's a curriculum that some of the homeschool groups around here participate in. This method is based on the ancient model of education used from the time of the Roman Empire through the Middle Ages. And it divides education into two parts: the trivium and the quadrivium. The trivium consists of 3 stages, which is grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And during this stage, they embark on a study of the quadrium, which consists of special areas of study. So they start with the basics, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and then they move into different special areas of study. Since the children have learned how to study and reason during their study of the trivium, then they are ready to study in-depth subjects for which God has most gifted them, like music, science, humanities. Curriculum that use this style are My Father's World, the Tree of Life School, and Book Service, Latin and the Christian Trivium, and also the Classical Conversation. Advantages is the sequence of Trivium accurately models the way that most children learn, and therefore is very effective. So there's 3 stages. They learn in the grammar, they learn the components, whatever it is to that subject. The logic, they learn how to use those components together and sequence them together. And in the rhetoric, they can then use that information abstractly. Some of the disadvantages, classical education often follows closely the content of ancient education. This includes languages such as Latin, as well as the study of the great books. While this is beneficial for the humanities-oriented student, it may not be the best choice for students who are strong in math and science and weak in the language arts. Mm. Do you have any experience with the classical education?
No, I had lots of friends who did it. Everyone that I know who really focused on that. I mean, I did pull out logic and certain things like that I would use, because I think that learning logic and or a Latin course helps you with English and words.
Yes.
Big time in understanding. But everybody I knew who did it really they depended on someone else helping and teaching and or paying someone to do that. And it was expensive and very scheduled and rigorous. So for me, it wasn't my cup of tea. But for some, those who want to follow that system, it was great. So
I did look into that for my youngest for this upcoming school year. I like the concept. Where it is here, there is a place where they go outside the home once a week, and there are instructors that are paid. The books and it was very pricey. It was cost prohibitive for us, quite frankly. I did like the component of during the week they're at home learning the information, and then they get together and through a facilitator they hash out the information. Right. So they have to really chew on the information and to be able to articulate it and defend their point of view, kind of thing. So but I figured that was something that we can do at home, and that we actually do at home. My children have they love the art and science of debate. And so those are concepts that can be environments where we can construct those skills, because it is important to learn how to defend a point of view that we have, how to be able to articulate it and express it, and to be able to reason and defend it in a respectable way. So
yeah. And I for some, it's almost like bringing school home, and that's what's comfortable and it works for. I mean, if it works, that's again, it's about what works for you and your family. And you don't know, your child maybe he's going to be a lawyer or something. I mean, you just don't know. You really have to, Father always provides where he guides. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You don't have to go get a loan to do it. I mean, maybe you're not supposed to do it, but. Just be open to how the Spirit is leading you. And it might not be for all your children either. It might just be for one.
Exactly. Definitely. And then also there's the eclectic, which is basically what a lot of us do.
There used to be an eclectic homeschool magazine. Is there still?
Oh, I'm not sure. Sure.
There was, because Yeah,
a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of workbooks for math, a little reading and spelling, taking, the unschooling approach for other subjects. So, so The eclectic is just like it sounds, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. The advantage is that it lets the parent pick the subjects that they believe are the most important and are covered thoroughly. It makes it more adaptable and flexible for each student. It allows the family to choose the textbooks, the field trips, the classes that fit their needs and interests, and it works well for teaching multiple ages. The disadvantage is kids sometimes resent the mandatory portions of their curriculum, also the large amount of time necessary to plan and to gather ideas and materials, the possibility of leaving things out while you're creating your own plan, the fact that the method that seems best to you today may not be, or it may be, you may think it seems best, but it could be a really poor one, but you don't know until after you've used it. But I like that a la carte kind of method.
There is eclectichomeschool.org online.
Oh, okay. Yeah. To me, it's individualizing. In our school system here, we have what's called an IEP, an individual education plan. And to me, that is eclectic. It is individualizing my child's curriculum based on their interest, their needs, their strengths, and that type of thing. So, what do you have? Any thoughts?
No, go. I mean, pretty much depending on the year.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, I used to write some homeschool curriculum for the magazine, but I think it's all online now.
Okay, excellent. So what is that, eclecticmagazine.org?
I think it's eclectichomeschool.org.
Oh, okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that resource. And then, of course, there's unschooling. This is also known as natural, interest-led. I think some people have called it free range.
Delight-directed.
Yes, delight-directed, child-led learning. They learn from everyday life experiences. They don't use school schedules or formalized lessons. Instead, unschooled children follow their interest and learn in much the same way as adults do, by pursuing an interest or a curiosity. In the same way children learn to walk and talk, unschooled children learn their math, science, reading, and history. The advantages is the unschooled children have time and research abilities to become experts in the areas of their interest. They tend to be curious and tenacious at finding ways to satisfy that curiosity. There's a flexibility in schedule. Children seem to be very self-reliant and self-confident. Disadvantages is that unschoolers do not follow the typical school schedule. They may not do as well on grade level assessments, and they may have a harder time if they re-enter the school system or a formalized education system, like if they decide to go to college. They may struggle to adapt to that because it's so unfamiliar. Because it's self-directed learning, demonstrating and documenting learning can be tricky too. And like we talked about last week, with the legal aspects, you really have to know what your state and district require. So if you choose unschooling, you have to be very aware and cognizant as to what the documentation requirements are. So it takes planning if your child wishes to attend college or re-enter a formalized education institution. Nitsa, do you know much about
Well, let me tell you, the first homeschoolers or unschoolers that came about in the 80s and 90s actually wrote a book and ended up going to Harvard.
Isn't that great? I love that.
I'm just letting you know. So it depends on your circle. I think part of the issue with this is that it really depends on the parents. And back in those days, we're not as educated as we were.
Absolutely not.
So to be honest with you, okay, so I probably the last 5 years have been an unschooler. But let's say this. Here's my point I want to make about that is I made sure they had the basics of math and English. in Bible, so that, and then because my two youngest, because by that time it was no longer we were homeschoolers, it was a lifestyle, because I go and teach and learn myself, you know what I mean? And I think that's the thing about the ones that went to Harvard. They didn't have parents who, either worked all the time and was not engaged with their children. It's really about the example that you set in your home, versus what we have today that I've experienced is we have a lot of unschoolers that aren't really homeschoolers. You know what I mean? They just, there's those who we really shouldn't be telling how to do something on one hand. On the other hand, they're what we wouldn't call or associate with homeschoolers, and we don't want to be associated with them because we have a certain character and a lack of work ethics and a lack of moral values. And so really that definition of homeschooling can be totally different depending on your character and the character of the parents. And so I think that's a big issue. So like you said, there may be some disadvantages, but in my day, it wasn't a disadvantage. And I can tell you in the situation, for instance, my 18-year-old who just finished, he was a perfect example. He's the one who, like me at 7 years old, was just reading through the encyclopedia. And, he listened to the phonograms I was teaching his older brother, and that was the end. I didn't, it was like I didn't have to do a whole lot more after that. But he's basically what they're called didactic, right? But here's the thing. I've always felt bad for public school kids or Christian school kids because it's really not fair. My child and your child can learn what he loves and learn it well, so that by the time he's 12, 13, 14, 15, and we've had 2 sons do this so far, they had their own business. They were sought after by adults. And so my son, and my oldest son, he had his own loan business. He was fixing machinery and cars and trading and, all kinds of things by the time he was 12 or 13. And he was the one who had a hard time reading. Okay. But he could fix and do things. My 18-year-old now, he's 18 years old. And since he was 12, and this is a suggestion you may want, at 12 years old, he had a 10-year plan. He wanted to learn certain things. He wanted to be prepared to be self-employed and to get married, etc. And he wanted to start a business, owning his own server and providing service for people's websites. So we made him do a PowerPoint presentation of the cost, the return on investment, etc. And he presented it to us, and he convinced us. And so we loaned him the money to start that business. And over a course of year, when he got paid and made money, he paid it back. And then every time he made money, he reinvested it, because he couldn't go off to some vocational school. It didn't exist. He would reinvest and buy more computers and more computer parts and more cameras and more videos. And so now at 18, he's still doing computer work, but he's also filming. He just filmed, with his own camera, because he had it, the Northwest junior NBA basketball tournament here that was held. So, but if he had spent all his time schooling the way people thought he should, he wouldn't have all those skills and ability. And so it can come out to your advantage. My oldest daughter, she hated school, but she knows how to run a home. She knows how to administrate. She knows how to manage. She knows how to clean. She's got everything in order. Of course, she was with us during the years we were raising children and having a children's home. When she was 16, she hated school. She hated book work. She said, "Mom, please just let me graduate." So I let her go to the local vocational school. She passed the test for completing her diploma, which we also gave her a private school diploma, but she had to pass a certain test. And by the time she was 17, she was finished with high school, and she had a certification in cosmetology. So those are the kinds of things you can do. There are other children that we purposely held back because they want to dual enroll. And if you promote them too fast, then they're not eligible for dual enrollment. So just because they can graduate early is not always a good thing. So you got to play those by ear and look at what will fit each child.
Exactly. And just to expound a little bit upon dual enrollment, dual enrollment is when they earn college credit in high school at a much cheaper cost, by the way, at least here in Kentucky. And so that's what my son did for his senior year, was attend a local community college and get a head start on his college degree. So I didn't learn about it till then. My daughter will probably do that her junior and senior year, just because she knows right now what she wants to do. So I love that. I love that encouragement, because if your son, especially the one who started a business, if he was to go to college and get a quote unquote business degree, he would be 22, 23, have a business degree, and still not be where he is now.
And be in debt.
Oh, absolutely.
That's just what I was going to say. Be in debt. Lots of debt.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much for that, for those examples.
I have a little question before we move on real quick.
Sure.
Patty, on unschooling, when I started, a lot of websites and a lot of, because there's so many resources now needs for homeschoolers. There was a lot of people that spoke about, and in the books that I've been reading, about unschooling your children as you're coming into homeschooling. Are you familiar with that term, unschooling your child? Not necessarily as a curriculum, but as a time period where you kind of like just, I guess it's getting them outside, or even you as a mom,
deprogramming.
Yeah, I don't know that we would have used that word, but we did talk about that first year, especially. It's about getting a teachable spirit, about working on relationship and undoing that whole mindset and concept so that we can come into an organic, functional, living family instead of just copying the system, probably. So maybe they're using that word as unschooling, as in the school system, but I don't know.
Yeah, and some people have a negative connotation about that term unschooling, like they're not learning. And that is false. That's a false premise.
Yeah, they just think it's a bunch of wild children, which,
Right, but it's allowing the child, it's not unlearning, it's unschooling, it's deprogramming, it's getting out, like unplugging from the matrix, the system way of doing things. And really, it's very individualized and pursuing interest. And it really fosters a love for learning. It really does.
And again, remember, we taught them the basics so that they
Right.
could think, could reason, could learn. It's not like they weren't schooled, right?
Right. Exactly.
So that's important to, to understand that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when looking at a curriculum, other things to consider, whether it's self-paced, whether it's colorful or versus plain. Remember, we talked about with the different styles of learning, some things that are engaging to one student or style of learning can be overstimulating to the other. I like that term, delight directed. The 3 R's, does it reading, writing, arithmetic plus Hebrew. Consider I'm not sure what you mean by the focus pivot, and also the ancient paleo plus the modern alphabet. So do you want to elaborate on the concepts that you have listed here?
I'm not sure what focus pivot is. Did I put that on there, Victoria?
It's on there.
I don't know what I was thinking.
Well, and what comes to my mind needs when I was going through the outline is really, for me as a new homeschool mom, I was so hyper focused on finishing the work at the pace that I thought needed to be done. I mean, and I don't know if that's what you meant, but that's really how I took it, as being able to pivot your focus on whatever the child needs. And really that's how I took it, but that's how you.
Yeah, we'll go with that.
Well, to be honest with you, I don't know. So we'll discuss the other ones. I don't know what I was thinking. Okay, so basically we did talk a little bit about safe-paced individual things versus the textbook. And there is a place and time for that. And again, some people like to use it all for every subject. I personally think that's death to me or to my child. But hey, if you're a working mom, if you're a single mom, the best thing you can do is have your child at home. And if that's what you have to do to get this to work for you guys, do it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So again, it's about, sometimes we do have to pick the lesser of two evils. I mean, when I first came home, my first year, I was still working. So not that I use self-paced, but you know, and there were some children that I was helping in junior high and high school that were half in school and half homeschooling. And to get some of their subjects for graduation, you know, we gave them self-paces in certain subjects. So, and then the color versus the plain. I personally love the Christian Light and Rod and Staff books, which are actually Mennonite or Amish books. I probably because they remind me of the public school books I had growing up. They weren't full of color. They were very simple. It's plain. It's, you know, it's right to what you got to learn. No messing around. One thing you got to pick up, and I'll bring this up because we saw this in the Facebook room this week. One of the things I loved about the Amish books, Christian Light Units or Rod and Staff. Rod and Staff is very solid, basic stuff, because the Amish, what they do is they only school their kids to about 7 or 8 years old. Now they may change this a little lately, but when you were done with that, you went on to apprenticeship. So you had learned everything you needed to learn. They didn't have to have you another 4 or 5 years to teach you what, you know, people need to learn, because that's the way historically we went to school 3 or 4 years. We learned everything. We were done. We went on. But the pictures in them, even if they were just line drawings, was mom in a dress. Mom could be feminine. Mom could be just at home. She could be a mom, and the value of mom was treasured. So that's one of the reasons I kind of liked those books too. And that was me coming from, before you're out there squirming all over, I came from the business world. Okay. Father just twisted me around and knocked me upside the head and brought me home. So, you know, you have to stop and think, if your children only see, you know, moms dressed in pants in the business world, how does that affect what they think? Is it okay for mom to have a head covering? Is it not okay? Is it okay for her to have a dress? Is it okay for her to be at home and cooking and baking? She still has extreme value. Now, we saw this in the Facebook room this week. I don't pay attention to a lot, but someone showed some flashcards for the letter F for a flag that had the rainbow colors. And there were only 6. Most people don't know or recognize this. The LGBTB, whatever you want to call it, agenda, their flags only have 6 colors. Pay attention. Yahweh has 7 colors in his rainbow. But that was put in the curriculum. So you have to, you have to be aware of that visual. Okay. And some children just can't, too much color, too much picture is just too stimulating to them. It just really depends on your child. Delight Director, we talked about that. That's, even if you do decide to, teach every textbook, every subject, try to build up extracurriculum activity that is delight directed, whether it's art, music, building, whatever. The 3 R's, I think basically my point about that was stick to the 3 R's, reading, arithmetic, I can't even remember what they are anymore. Writing, reading, and arithmetic. And then, of course, as Torah embracing Hebrew scholars, raising a remnant, we want to return to the original language the best we can. And the best we can is modern day Hebrew, which, now that I'm mentioning that, I want to tell you, I think you can Google it and get it online. Here it is.
Oh, are you showing something on screen?
Yes. Oh, well, I'm going to try,
Okay.
but I'm going to read it to you. Okay. I printed this out, but this is called Tongue of the Prophets, the life story of Eliezer ben Yehuda. This is the man that was responsible for restoring the Hebrew language back to the world after it was basically a dead language. And this was online.
Can you repeat that name?
Tongue of the Prophets.
Later. Can we post it online later?
Tongue of the Prophets, the life story of Eliezer ben Yehuda. And this was written by a Robert St. John. It was a Doubleday book in 1952, but I found it online. This is a wonderful book and story to read to your children. And one thing I want to say is, this is just a pet peeve. You may disagree, but this is what I have learned. You don't have to dumb down the Bible, and you don't have to dumb down what you read to your children. They may ask a question and you might need to explain it to them. I mean, obviously you don't want to be way above their head that they don't understand, but they will rise to the occasion. And if all you're using is dumbed down, don't throw tomatoes at me, VeggieTales and color Bible stories that are dumbed down, they're not really going to learn his word the way they need to. And if you want to stop and think about this, Jewish children remember whole sections in the Torah from like 3 or 4 years old and up. I had an 18-month-old daughter who could recite all of Psalm 27 or 23. They can do it. It's just that we have the bar lowered and lowered and lowered. And we need to raise that, which, by the way, part of the question was that we should bring up that you were going to put this in the notes. If somebody wanted to know if will they share the slides or the notes? And if I understand correctly, is that not something that's going to be working on the Crossing Over site? Correct? Okay. All right. And then I don't know what's next on the slide.
Okay, let me get back to that.
As you can see, I'm very visual. I have my photographic memory's gone. Okay.
All right. Yes.
Focus pivot. Go back just one. Focus pivot.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Ancient Paleo Hebrew plus modern alphabet. I wrote a book. I just got to finish some of the tests in it. But one of the things, and if you homeschool moms and dads, listen to this. One of the things I needed to do for me was coming home to homeschool your children, even though I was pretty well educated, was really about me relearning God's word and how to think. So if I wanted to learn Hebrew and I wanted to teach it to my children, I had to learn it. So what I did, and this was a long time ago, we didn't have all these tools, but I learned that if I learned the ancient Hebrew picture, I understood the modern picture, and because I'm visual. And so I wrote a curriculum on that. And we used it in our family and our Bible studies and stuff. And I've just never got to publish it. But I mean, I have it. I've sent it sometimes to people. It's a PDF. But again, that's just, I think if you're raising a remnant, those are things, besides, of course, the Torah and the scriptures you need to. And the feast count as school, by the way. The whole week of Sukkot is learning. It's history, it's Bible, it's science. You just gotta rethink how you think. So if you're filling out all that paperwork to report to what you do in your journal, you got to rethink it, because I can tell you that a teacher does the exact same thing. They just change the wording, the way they think, and the concept about it. Okay. When you learn to cook different things for the feast, this is a great book called, I'll read it to you. It's called Fast and Festive Meals for the Jewish Holidays. Love this book. It tells you how many days in advance you can do what. I think it's got the blessings. It's broken down by minutes and time and pictures for all the feasts. So that's all part of learning. That's all part of school, and look at it. You're doing science and you're measuring and you're doing history and you're doing geography, and you have to train your mind and how you're thinking. Going to the beach. That's a homeschool activity. Okay. Now my children got to where they just hated everything was homeschool. Everything was school, but it was part of learning. So anyway, I'm done.
Well, and everything is learning, you know what I mean? Everything involves learning. So absolutely. I had to kind of rethink that as well. We've got about 15 more minutes, so I definitely want to get to questions. And so do we want to talk briefly about
Yeah, I can just mention these really quick. So basically, if you want your children to learn, start reading to them at a very young age. Can you go to the next slide? Back one. Family reading aloud together as a whole family, not just the Bible, but picking a story. I'll give you a suggestion that were some of my favorites. The Parcel of Patterns. Lost but Not Forgotten, Story of the Amish, The Parcel of Patterns. The reason I loved that book was because it was about the plague, and it was as if you lived during it, and it showed the difference between the different kinds of believers. It's a family bonding time. The younger children, like I said, can be sitting and drawing or crafting. Then they can come back. Esther is a great story of Esther is a great one to do this. Read it, have the children come back, narrate it back to you, and or put on a play for you, and just let them do it. So go ahead. One can go to the next one. Use biographies. Several biographies on the same person if you really want to learn more about it, and then all your children can also learn critical thinking and go, well, Mom, if it says this in this book about George Washington, it says this, how can that be true? An example of this is I spent 3 years in deep research, reading about 100 books in primary and secondary documents on Pocahontas. If you want to study Pocahontas, you don't study Pocahontas. You look for Lady Rebecca Rolfe, because she was the first native baptized and saved in this nation. And she married an Englishman who went through this great trial with God on Yahweh on how and why he would be married to a savage and a woman from another nation. Anyway, maybe one day we'll do a whole thing on that. But my point about that was, in some of the books, it said that she was at the Globe Theater at the Shakespeare play when she went to England. However, if I had not read multiple books on the subject, I would not have known that could not be true. And the reason is because the Globe had burnt down before she ever got there. So that's why primaries and secondary documents are so important. One, they're either written by the person or by people who knew them or lived during that time period. Most of our American history was rewritten. The war between the North and the South, most of those documents were rewritten. And they were propaganda. The story of Pocahontas saving Captain John Smith, for example, it's been taught that wasn't true, et cetera. Well, that's not true either, because if you research, there was that same similar practice way back before then. And even when they came over to to Virginia at the time, wasn't Virginia like it is now, it was the whole East Coast, basically. They were not allowed to report back anything negative because they wanted the money and the investors through the trading company. So the propaganda and the political issues go way back in everything. So it's important that if you can, especially your older children, your junior high and high school children, try to find primary and secondary documents, which a lot of biographies or fiction books or nonfiction books on the topic, you can find and research that. That's an excellent thing if your child loves to read and write, to learn how to do that. There is I think they're online now, but there was a volume, kind of like encyclopedias, called The Annals of America. And it has primary document after primary or secondary document printed. And we really, truly don't know that history unless we've actually read that. And when you start doing the primary, secondary documents, it'll just blow your mind that you were taught all this wrong stuff. Pioneers, early schoolers, literally the mother of invention. Yeah, we've talked about that. That basically, when we first came in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we didn't have curriculum. And now there's hundreds and hundreds of homeschool curriculums and groups. In a lot of secular witchcraft groups for homeschoolers, whatever you name it, they've got it. But whatever you need, Father can provide. And if it's not there, Father can inspire you to create what it is that you need. Well, here we go. We have the Torah Observant Messiah Saved Homeschool Network International on Facebook.
Woohoo! Amen.
One day, hopefully, willing, I taught it to my children bits and pieces. Writing Out of Egypt, Raising a Remnant for homeschoolers is basically revolved around the 12 months and the 12 tribes and the feasts. And Elliot, which we will have next week, I won't be here, but she will be. She's the first one that I know of that really called it Homeschooling Torah. Back in the day, which if you don't have this information, write it down. Eagle's Wings has a curriculum called Celebrating Our Messiah in the Festivals. And the author's name is Mortimer, Mortimer, I believe. She also has 2 books that I find I personally really liked, was Remembering God's Awesome Acts, Volume 1, and Remembering God's Chosen Children. And so that was back in the day when we, some of us were Messianic Hebrew roots, but this was the closest thing that we had, and it's still very good. They're not 2 house or nothing like that, but Adam and His Kin, that's a wonderful book. Adam and His Kin, written by Ruth Beechick. That is an excellent book to read to your children because it's like a narrative of the Genesis, like you're living through it. And read Ruth Beechick. She was huge in homeschooling. She was actually, I think, an English educator, but she wrote so much to help succeed for home educators. And again, Robin Scarlatta Sampson, Heart of Wisdom. She has her feast book. Okay. And the more you grow in this, if you're a Christian and you're walking into Torah, the more you're going to tweak it and see, it's really about the return of the remnant, etc. But that's okay. Don't get all wigged out about it. Just learn. And as you learn, tweak it. None of it's going to be perfect. And if you want to learn some Hebrew, I can share real quick here. There's no www. But it's able, able.e Crater, Crater. So it's ecrater.com. The McDonald's have a wonderful homeschool family and ministry. They are on Messianic Lamb Radio every week. The whole family, and they do a show called Let's Midrash. It's the whole family. It's amazing what she's done with her children. And I would suggest you go to Hebrew4Christians.com. There's a whole curriculum in there. And go to Jeff Benner's Ancient Hebrew site, because that's more about how you think like a Hebrew, and you're going to find, I don't on this department, but maybe I do. Some of you have Father's already been changing your mind on how you think and how you reason, and you're going to go, oh, wow, so I would check out that. And then I don't know what else was on there on that page. Sorry, if you could read.
Sorry. Yes, one moment.
Because I know we're going. This was our last slide, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And it's not coming up. So I'll just read it. So there are several Now You See TV shows that are appropriate for homeschool curriculum. There's going to be a possible Now You See TV homeschool conference in 2019. The Crossing Over website will feature a homeschool section. The Crossing Over monthly homeschool show that we talked about, just continuing this series once a month after we're completed with this 8-part series this summer. So starting, in September, we'll be continuing with a monthly homeschool show. And then one of the Now You See TV fellowship families, of course, Gary and Faye Arbarl, their Torah Town has lots of resources.
Cool.
And just to add to that, the El Shaddai ministry has a lot of like the Torah portion curriculum. So they have there's just different ministries that have different aspects of curriculum around the Torah portion. So that was
you guys have so many more choices than we had. You really have no excuse. No.
Exactly. So I know we've just got about 5 minutes left. Victoria, do you want to go ahead and ask some questions from the chat room?
Well, I'll tell you, there's only one question, but the feedback has been so amazing, guys. I know that we've given a lot of information, and so people keep saying we have to go back and listen to it a second time. But absolutely, we will be sharing our slides. We will get there. I know we haven't posted it, but if you go to the Crossing Over Facebook page, we will be able to definitely share our slides, whichever show you guys need. And also the our Gmail address, which is crossingover8@gmail.com. We will definitely share whatever notes you guys need. And really, the only question that was presented on the YouTube chat was there's a listener, and I didn't get their name, unfortunately. I'm sorry, someone in the chat that says that their daughter has ADHD and Asperger's with a borderline issue, and if there's any advice or strategies on her learning and what to do, which I do want to mention that we will be having a specific show on special needs that we will be addressing this, but I personally want to encourage a mom out there that definitely there's an amazing things that you can do for your kids, and the fact that it's such a blessing that if you are struggling with your child and all of these things, that it's an amazing thing to be able to homeschool them. So be encouraged. And I don't know if you guys want to chime in. Like I said, we are going to be having a specific show on special needs that we will be addressing these issues. But if you guys want to encourage this mom, that would be awesome.
Well, like I said, I haven't seen what's new out there because I haven't been to a conference in a long time, but I can tell you, I did go online and find, I think these people are still around. So if you want to take notes here, there is a Joyce Herzog, Herzog, and she was an amazing teacher who came into the homeschooling arena, and she has a scaredy cat reading system. She has a site called www.abilitybasedlearning.com. If you could get information or read her book, she has a book on special needs. Excuse me. And so she's been around a long time, so she would definitely be someone to glean from. There is a site called Preach, Preacch. I'm not sure what the exact website is. Jill Bond, she was a pioneer homeschooler. Her and I went way back. Jill wrote a book called Dinners in the Freezer. She also wrote Writing to God's Glory. Amazing woman. And I think she has a online magazine for Christians, but she keeps the Sabbath, and she's an amazing woman. There is a group called Nathan, Nathan, which stands for National Challenged Homeschoolers Association Network. I'm not familiar with this one, but I found this one, www.ican-do.net links. There's help out there. And those seem to be the three. And then I found one I didn't, but it seems to be out of Australia, called learningdiscoveries.com.au. And it talks about neurology challenges and ADHD. So, and then hopefully we'll be able to track some of these people down and have them come share. Or if you guys have someone who's willing to do that. And don't forget drleafs.org, I believe. And then the only other question I saw, which I wanted to address a little bit, I kind of did in the last show, is somebody said, what about history curriculum that doesn't, make America as amazing and perfect? Again, I am prejudiced because I studied the primary and secondary documents. Yes, America is, built on the New World Order and the Illuminati and yada, yada, yada. But if you read how because we got to remember this, it is his story in every nation and every people that he has throughout the world. He brought a people to this country who were escaping persecution, who understood their roots, who understood who he was. And I believe worldwide, but particularly in this country, he was hiding the remnant of Israel. And if you read why the original ones came here, that weren't just involved in, trying to get money and expanding their territory. But I mean, I could go into this, but I'm telling you, if you read the believers, let's not discredit God's work that he did in this country and the people that he sent to build the freedom that we have, which I believe a majority of us are the sons of Joseph, because that blessing was passed down because of Joseph's obedience. And so, again, if you can teach the basics of general history in America or anything, remember and teach your children. It's general. This is what's generally out there. But if you really want to know the truth, you need to go to the primary and secondary documents. And there's very few books. And here's the other thing to remember when you're reading history. Every history book, and even science book, even, gay flag, English, cards for consonants or whatever. Everything is written with a person's mindset and worldview of who or who is not the creator of the universe. And you have to compensate and own up to that and take responsibility for that. And use it as a tool for what they have. There's great heathens with great information, but the rain is on the just and the unjust. And so you have to be able to discern through that and teach your children to discern that. And yes, to certain ages, you wouldn't subject them to that. But I just want to say, don't be so hard on this country, because God put his people here and his people have been here and continue to grow. If you travel outside this country and you know how we're represented in other countries, you'd be ashamed to be an American. On the other hand, we should be proud and thankful that we're here because God's given us this freedom and this ability. So try to keep it in a balanced perspective would be my suggestion.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. I'm just so thankful to be able to be a part of this homeschool series. I know I'm learning a ton, and it's very, very edifying for me and our homeschool family. And so thank you, Nitsa. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, all of you listeners out there. We're just so grateful that you are joining us. Again, connect with us on the Crossing Over Facebook page, crossingover8@gmail.com. And Nitsa, would you please give your contact information?
Well, let's see. I'm on Facebook under Nitsa Moshe, or you can contact me at nitsa@remnantremedy.net, even though the page here says .com, or go to remnantremedy.com and there's a contact there. So yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you. And I will see you girls in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, because I'm going to Messiah West Coast Camp, not just with my son, but with my two of my grandsons. So I'm really excited about that.
That is exciting. Oh, you'll have to tell us all about it. So please join us next week. We will have Ann Elliott with Homeschooling Torah. And I'm really looking forward to that. So until then, we just want to thank you all for joining all of us. And we wish you shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom.